A big hello and welcome. It's Kate from Zen Stitching, and I'm super delighted to join you today as part of another one of our Making Zen online retreat series. Today I'm in the studio, so to speak, with Andrea Tsang Jackson, and I'm super delighted she is joining us once again to share some of her amazing skills and techniques with us.
Thanks for having me here, and thanks for inviting me to be part of the Making Zen retreat.
You're most welcome. Well, I just love this, and I'm starting to lose track now. Is this the third Making Zen that you've been part of?
Maybe just second. But I think I was part of the first one.
You were definitely part of the first one. That
Yeah.
I remember well.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling we may have reconnected, but we've been in and out of and doing all these kind of things. So
Yeah.
it's sometimes things get a little bit blurred, I have to say.
Yeah.
Um, my memory isn't what it used to be, but anyway, I'm delighted that you're back because you are the most amazing artist, and I just get so excited. I don't know where to start first because you're a textile artist. You've taken your textiles and love of quilts into the public realm as well, and there's really lots of different facets, I would say, to your creative journey. One thing I really liked is a quote that you had on your website where you say you push the limits of the quilting medium by exploring scale and dimension. You take domestic objects and put them into the public realm. And I think that is a very beautiful way of summing up your process and your techniques. But I feel by saying that I've always so jumped in the deep end for all of our listeners who this is the first time that they've met you. And so would you like to share with us how you came to be where you are in your creative process?
Yeah, sure. I have always been a creative dabbler, and especially in craft. So making things with my hands since I was a very small child. And I would never say that I was an artistic child because that just didn't seem to fit what I thought of myself as. But it was very clear, even from my kindergarten report card, that like I just loved making things. She can delve into crafts for a really long time, sort of thing. And so from there, like as a teenager, I made a lot of jewelry out of different things. My mom would take me to Michael's, and we'd get supplies on the weekends. And she taught me how to sew a little bit, but I never really dove into sewing. She gave me my first sewing machine when I was in my early 20s, and I started making bags, screen printing them on my own, kind of like hack job screen printing. I took jewelry, like silversmithing classes. Just really loved making. And my academic life, I was studying design. I was studying architecture, and they are very related, very, very related things. Different scales, but the same kind of idea of producing, of imagining something and having it come to be in real life. And and so sewing became a more prominent part of my life when I became a mom. So I was pregnant with my first baby, and I made my first quilt. I designed it because I had a design background. I knew how to do that. Didn't really know how to quilt, but YouTube helped me a little bit. Probably overcomplicated things for myself. But I made my first quilt for my first baby, made a second one much more kind of ambitious for my second baby. And I found these fabrics at the fabric store, which I'd never encountered before, but it was just a palette of seemingly infinite number of solid colors. And to me, that just opened up a world of quilting that was modern. And I didn't know anything about modern quilting at the time. I just knew that there's maybe something I could say in this kind of medium with these fabrics. And so kind of organically from there, a couple years in, I made a couple more, the quilts that were not notable of any, in my mind, in any case, that were just fun to make. And then I started designing patterns for quilters because I had started making these gemstone quilts kind of as experiment for myself, figuring out how these kinds of faceted gems could be rendered in fabric in kind of larger scale, like something really small made into something really big, and something hard made into something soft. And so from there I started designing some quilt patterns, and then selling some quilted items, just trying out a whole bunch of different things in the space of making craft, design, and art. And but I always had this idea because in my architecture background, I was really concerned with the public realm. Like I really, if I had followed the architecture track and had become a licensed architect, I was never really interested in designing homes or designing private dwellings. I was much more interested in how design and architecture can affect the public and our communities. And so I was looking for ways when I was quilting to kind of marry the two things and see how they could come together. Because quilts, of course, they just say home. That's what that is. That's what it says. It says home, safe. I'm home and cozy. My family, like these are kind of words that we think about when we think of quilting and kind of atmospheres that we imagine. But I was like, but because they mean so much to people, quilts, textiles, like why don't we see them in public places? Are they too soft? What does that mean? But how can we, people connect to these so easily. So how can we kind of tap into that in the public realm? And so I've always been looking for opportunities of being able to kind of bring the domestic art, so quilting, other kind of rug hooking, other kinds of art forms, craft forms to the public in different ways. And so the first one was a public art project. Actually, it wasn't a public art project. It was a residency where I was working with visitors to the Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 here in Halifax. And folks would be invited to make a little block, just not sew, but just kind of represent a quilt block using fusible, so kind of more collage-like, but with fabric, to represent their family's immigration story. And that was kind of, people really took to it because, again, like there's such a connection to quilting. As soon as you see it, you're like, oh, my grandmother or my aunt, or, I've always wanted to learn how to quilt. There's always this immediate recollection of something in your mind of what quilting can mean to you personally. And so anyway, it was a really easy way to talk to people about quilting. And over the years, it's transformed into other ways that I've been able to make public art that is themed around textiles. Have a translation of actual physical textiles to maybe harder materials that are a little bit more durable in that space, and that can kind of hold up to public use, I guess, and use and abuse, I guess, sometimes. There's, you can't tell what people are going to do with art sometimes in public spaces. But anyway, the journey has been just really fulfilling and very organic. Just like I had this very general idea, like how can textiles exist in the public space, and just kind of pursued answers to that question in different ways.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful, creative way of approaching a concept or an idea because, like you say, a lot of the domestic arts are inside the home, and they're not durable, so they don't really last if they're in a public space for a long period of time, not in a pristine sense of the word anyway. So it's I love that you've taken the concepts of these processes and then changed them into more durable ways, applications. For example, is it a multi-story car park in Halifax that you've created a metal cladding based on some of the local traditions of the area?
Yes. So there is a newish, a few years old now, parking building for a parkade. People from different parts of the world call it a different thing. A parkade, car park, parking building. Anyway.
That's probably my Australianisms coming in.
Yeah. So I was able to, I had the opportunity to create artwork and graphics for the exterior of this parking building, expressing different traditions of craft that have been in Nova Scotia for a long time or more recent. And it was the main work of that project was really delving into the stories of individual people who practice these crafts or have a history or family history of folks that are really involved with that particular craft form, and they come from very specific cultures. We here in Nova Scotia, our Indigenous peoples are Mi'kmaq, the Mi'kmaq people, and so there's lots of traditions from there that are related to craft. And so I made a new friend, Ida, and she told me about her involvement with making regalia. Her own kind of takes on traditions that have been here for a long time. And so her story is kind of illustrated in a certain way with these with motifs that are then printed on fabric and then photographed and then manipulated to kind of represent on the parquet. So there's also quilting, rug hooking from Camp, and Acadian weaving, my own story a little bit with my connection to textiles and entrepreneurship. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a business owner. He traded textiles. And so one of those stories is there. And so it's kind of, not to get too philosophical about it, but I think of it as a work of nonfiction. Like when we think of art, often we think of, you can maybe think of a landscape that's represented, and that's kind of an interpretation of a real place. But sometimes you think of an imagination, right? And an imagined scene or imagined people, and that becomes the artwork. In literature, it's quite clear. There's fiction and then there's nonfiction. And that's kind of what I applied to this work, is that it's a work of nonfiction. I talked to real people and presented their stories in a sort of journalistic, hopefully with integrity, the way that they have told their stories to me, but through visual art instead of writing. So it was a really fascinating project to work on. And the artwork, the visuals of it was almost seemed like a small part to the research and the time that I spent getting to know these folks and these stories.
It's I love how you've described the creation of that as a non-fiction artwork, so to speak, because like you say, there isn't that kind of definition within the visual arts so much as there is in the written world. And something that I think that comes through really strongly with your creative practice is your working with community and collaboration, and how that really does inform your creative process with the Pier 21, the Immigration Museum, that artwork that had a very strong component of collaboration with the public. The parquet also has a strong collaboration too. So it is a really lovely way of your philosophy of working with the public, yet with the personal and the private space as well, with the domestic. So it's a lovely mix of ways of working.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. I think that maybe it's because I feel that sometimes the work I get to do, I have the privilege of doing, feels almost indulgent, although I would never use that word to describe to anybody else's art. But for me, it was sometimes when I just want to make, I'm just making what I want to make, it feels, it feels self-indulgent in certain ways. I'm asking questions. And so to be able to connect with a community and connect with people, real people, and connect ideas together is a real honor to be able to do that through my artwork.
And I would imagine too that through that collaboration process, it's also building and taking your ideas even further than, say, perhaps you might have had on your own, just through that collaboration and discussion process with others as well.
Yeah, it's most certainly there would be no way I could reach those, travel to those places without other people kind of taking me along on their journey, and then our kind of journeys kind of meeting. And so I think part of it also comes from quilting as a medium itself. It's probably one of the most collaborative art forms that there is. It's kind of inherent to it that you wouldn't think of painting as ever a collaborative endeavor. I mean, there are painters that work collaboratively, but I talk about this in my book. I guess we'll get to that later, but it is a unique thing to quilting that we get together and we do it. There's a social aspect to it. In the olden days, it was out of necessity that, you know, you would have a community come together and make a quilt because it would keep your family warm. And you would go to your neighbor's house and do this, you know, your community, another community member's house or a hall or something, and also work on a quilt for them. And in the same way, you know, farmers would work together to build barns together so that they, you know, kind of, so there's all of these connections of the community being part of quilting. We see that today, and you probably see it in on social media, that we collaborate through that, and we talk to each other, we share knowledge, we, you know, are part of a bigger picture of the art form than just our little small world of our space, our sewing room or our studio. Yeah, and it is just such a wonderful way to connect with people.
I agree with you 100%. And that's a really lovely kind of analogy you have with the quilting world. Because, yes, we get together and we share the experience of quilting. We do it together. There's also the sharing of the cloth as well, isn't there? Like cloth is either comes from someone special, or you'll share a beautiful piece of fabric with someone else. So there's also the shared materials that, like you say, may not happen in other kind of visual art mediums so much. Like I can't imagine myself saying, check out this paint, isn't it wonderful, let's swap, you know, like you don't have that same kind of tactility that fabric has. Yeah. And you touched a moment ago upon your latest book. So this is book number 2 that you've written. And this is a beautiful book because it, again, brings on your philosophy of modern yet traditional and kind of new and old. Pushing boundaries, I guess, is probably a way of exploring the boundaries of the quilted world. Would you like to share a little bit about your book with us?
Yeah, sure. So this is Quilting, and it came out earlier this year, and it's not your traditional quilt book. The first book I wrote was what you would typically think of as a quilting book. It was on gemstone quilting, and it had patterns for you to make the exact quilts that I made in the book. So, you know, there were gemstone shapes, 9 different shapes, 9 different patterns in different sizes, and then there were projects that you could make with those kind of blocks. This one is a lot more exploratory, and it's really about the how and why we quilt. And it asks you as a reader the question, like, why is it important to you? And why would you make time for it? Why do you make time for it? And then it invites you on these journeys. I call them quests. And I had a prompting question. There were quilts that I wanted to make. So again, kind of on this self-indulgent like theme. I had these quilts I wanted to make, and I had these questions that I wanted to answer through these quilts. And so I bring you along on those journeys and ask you questions that might be relevant to you through those quests. And it's kind of like invite you on the train, and then there's a few stops where you can get off. So you can try something, and then you're like, I'm getting off the train here. And you don't have to kind of fulfill it to the final project. But I ask you questions, and you can kind of answer them or try an exercise, and then I encourage you to try it at least. And then if you don't want to take it any further, that's fine. But in the journey, you have tried, and that's tried something new, and that is really key to kind of bringing yourself through a creative journey, kind of progressing in a way, or I don't mean linearly progressing, like I've reached, you know, intermediate quilter level or like advanced quilter. Just trying something new gives you information about how you like working and why you like doing something, and whether something is worth the effort or a little bit of struggle to get through. And so there's a lot of I ask you a lot of questions in the book. And I also, that's more the second half of the book. The first half of the book is 5 essays about quilting as a creative practice. And they are about order and chaos, surrendering to material and process, collective power, like I've talked about, the community aspect of quilting, responsibility to yourself. And what was the other one? It's right here. Let me just take a peek. Oh, building containers, actually. And that building containers is part of what I'm teaching at Making Zen. This idea that you're building yourself a little space to try something without a whole lot of investment in material or a lot of time. You just like, I'm going to carve myself out a little space of time, a little bit of material, and I'm going to try something new. And if I don't like it, I know that I don't like it. If I do like it, I can continue to pursue it. And so that kind of choice, but you've just kind of built yourself a little safe space to try something new, and the stakes are not too high. And then you can either move forward or just put it aside if you choose.
I love that. And having these containers is such a nice visual to kind of like think, oh, okay, this is my little 5-minute container, for example, where I'm just going to create for 5 minutes. Or another container might be restrictions in materials, I'm assuming. So for example, you might only work with one color or that kind of idea, so that you're creating boundaries, so to speak, within this safe space.
Exactly. So I guess I've never termed it this way, but the kind of walls of your container are those parameters of like 5 minutes. I'm only using the color blue. I'm only, using this size, restricting the size of something that you're working on. And those parameters help you to do something, because I know for myself as a younger artist, I was really paralyzed by a blank, like the idea of a blank canvas, or like I could do whatever I want. From my design background, there's so many limitations placed on you when you're designing something from a client. This is the budget, this is the timeline, this is the theme, these are the so there's those I find really comforting. Those walls of the container really help me to move forward in what I'm trying to express or what I'm trying to do. And so as an artist or a creative person, sometimes the exercise is setting up those boundaries for yourself. Or else it's like, the world is my oyster, and then it's like, I don't do anything because I have so much choice. Like, I think decision paralysis, I think it's a real phenomenon, psychological phenomenon, where you just have all of the choices, and so you don't make any choice.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's overwhelming if you're like, oh, I can do anything. You're like, oh, well, what does that mean exactly? Whereas if you say, you got these parameters of what you can and can't do, I think sometimes that is enforced creativity and goes back to what's the saying? What is it? The mother of necessity, innovation.
I know what you're talking about. I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Yeah, but that kind of like having not much is kind of what inspires you to then go and create and come up with something really interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's that same kind of restriction there. And I love that some of the processes in your book is what you will be teaching at Making Zen. Have you got any examples of what that might be?
Yeah. So at Making Zen, we'll be making fabric collages. Our kind of container is a 4x6 index card, and we're making fabric collages from our scraps. And so the limitation of only using scraps in your already existing stash, and then this very small surface, is an exercise to help you come up with a composition quite quickly, without thinking too hard about, without overthinking it, which is, I know it's a struggle for all of us, so not overthink things. And then we'll be turning those compositions into an improvised pieced quilted, like quilt, or panel, let's say. So this particular kind of improvised is from my scraps, but it started with this.
Oh, wow.
So just this kind of very 5-10 minute exercise can turn into quite a striking composition. And so we're going to be talking about kind of how to think about color, how to sort things so that they make sense. I think scraps can be overwhelming because you can have a lot of scraps. So we'll kind of be we'll be sorting and then editing them, and then, coming up with this collage, and then kind of slowly editing and curating something into a composition that is a dynamic, has contrast and interest, and all those things. So I'm excited to show you how to do that.
And I'm excited too. I just love the smaller compositions that you have on the 6x4 cards, and then seeing how that's then been translated into the larger quilt. And something that I've been dwelling on recently is the term scraps, because a lot of artists are using scraps in different ways in their projects for Making Zen. And I think I have to, myself personally, I'm going to call them treasures as opposed to scraps, because each one has a myriad of potential within it when you're kind of playing through your scraps container, just through the different shapes, the different colours and the textures and how they work together. So those little treasures, the little gems.
It's true. There is a world in each one, and I do actually have a less like I have a treasured scrap store. So like they are more treasured than some other ones.
Yeah.
Some of them are just volume, and then some of them I'm like, I really like these ones. But it turns out that when I took my treasured scrap drawer out and I dumped it out, I found that everything kind of went together once I sorted it. It was kind of a surprise but it makes sense if you think about it. Everything's gone through the filter of me. I've already made choices about what goes in that scrap drawer. And so it's just like what I like goes together with what I like. So I don't know. It kind of makes sense, but it was surprising though at the same time.
Yeah. Well, a delightful surprise, but like you say, it does make sense because you kind of you have your preferences, and so the favorites go in here, and then the lesser favorites but potentials go in another box as well. And I am curious, because this is something that I struggle with, is how do you sort and store your scraps? Do you have methods, or does everything just go into, well, I guess you kind of alluded to, you've got at least 2 separations.
Yeah, and that's probably as organized as thoughtful as the sorting has gone. I do have a bigger box, and it's a cardboard box. It's not even like a tote or anything. It's not even a cardboard box that everything else goes in. So I don't have a method that I have stuck to yet. I mean, I have an organizational way of dealing with, fat quarters and yardage that are sorted in kind of cool colors, warm colors, and neutrals. And then my fat quarters are all I can see them all at one time, usually. But the scraps, I don't have a system yet. No. There's lots of great systems out there that people have come up with, and I haven't delved into it yet. Other than I really like these, and I'm keeping these.
Yeah, no, well, fair enough too. And I think also as well that they perhaps, because they are scraps, they don't have the same kind of thought process applied to them so much as, I want to keep these because I might use them for another project. But apart from that, they'll just go into the scrap bin, so to speak. Yeah. Well, I love that. And Andrea, I'm so excited. I love what you're going to be sharing with us for the Making Zen projects. This from the small to the large, both are beautiful, and I can see so much value for people who are really interested in learning your way of working from, perhaps they haven't tried making their own quilt design before, and so this is a really lovely way of learning the kind of how to put your colours together, how to work out a composition, and then taking it through to a larger quilt.
It's a really fun, kind of liberating, free way of quilting.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And before we wrap up, I just have to ask quickly, because I've been admiring your background behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about the quilt that we see behind you there?
Yeah, this quilt is in the book. It is actually a collaborative quilt, and it's a very simple block. It's called House, as you can imagine why it's called House. But it invites people to make this block in 3 different ways. So traditionally pieced, foundation paper pieced, or improvised. And it's particularly a group quilt in that of those 3 ways of making these blocks, I invite people to share their knowledge with their guild group or whoever is in the collaborative group making the group quilt together, so that it's a mechanism to be able to share knowledge and skills. So, if somebody that wants to learn improv quilting but has never tried it, this block is a really great way to try it. And then they all come together very easily, whatever method you choose. It appeals to different preferences of techniques, but also encourages kind of sharing and learning.
Oh, I love it. And I couldn't help but notice that your necklace matches your quilt behind you. Is that something that you also made?
Yeah, I did. I made it last week. I was working with a lot of rope in the last few months with some students. We were exploring the properties of rope and knots. And so I had a lot of I had a lot of rope left. And I came across this course online on how to make rope jewelry, and so I was experimenting. And I'm happy to report that this is embroidery floss. 3 of the 4 colors here are from my stash from when I was a child, so I was like 10. I had a little tin of embroidery floss that I made a lot of friendship bracelets with, macrame bracelets. Yes. And I kept a bunch, but that's what I had. And I did supplement with some colors that appeal to 40-year-old me, 42-year-old me, in the end, because I couldn't quite make the 10-year-old color palette work. This is something I would want to wear. So I did add this gold color.
Oh, that's so much fun. I love hearing that. Yeah. How delightful to have a connection and use some of your materials that you've had from a child to now. That's just so lovely.
Yeah, it was really, it's been sitting around in this tin. And I was really happy that I could use it in a way that was really appealing to me now as an adult. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's stunning. It looks beautiful on you.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Well, thank you again, Andrea. It's always lovely to chat with you, and I'm super delighted that you're part of Making Zen. And I can't wait to see what beautiful things you're going to inspire everybody after your workshops.
Amazing. Thanks for having me with Making Zen.
Thank you for joining me in this creative journey. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to learn more about Making Zen, please check out the links below where you can find out all about the workshops and creativity, community, and all that kind of good stuff. Wishing you many happy hours of stitching.